Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. I'm your host, and tonight I have something that's going to keep you up all night. You know those small towns you pass by on road trips? The ones with a gas station, maybe a diner, and friendly people who wave at strangers? Well, what if I told you some of those towns are hiding secrets so dark, so disturbing, that once you hear them, you'll never look at a quiet street the same way again? Tonight, I'm sharing 5 most disturbing true small-town legend horror stories. And I promise you, these aren't just legends. Real people lived through these nightmares, and some of them, well, you'll find out. Before we start, if you love true scary stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss an episode. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, are you ready? Because once we start, there's no going back. Let's dive into the first story, and I'm warning you, this one is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about small-town life. Here we go. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been a librarian for 12 years. I started at the downtown branch right after college, working my way up from part-time shelving to head of digital archives. I've helped thousands of people find information, tracked down rare books, and even solved a few cold cases using old newspaper records. But what happened last month in Remembrance Valley changed everything I thought I knew about history and memory. Some records should never be preserved. It started when my great-aunt Margaret died at 93. I barely knew her. She'd lived alone in some small mountain town for 60 years, working at their historical society. My mom always said Margaret was strange, that she'd become obsessed with old documents and never visited family anymore. When the lawyer called about the inheritance, I expected maybe some antique furniture and a small house to sell. What I got was a 2-story Victorian in Remembrance Valley, population 847, plus a job offer from the town council. They needed someone to take over Margaret's position as head archivist at the Remembrance Valley Historical Society. The pay was surprisingly good, twice what I made at the library, and they'd even cover moving expenses. The whole thing felt too easy, but I was tired of city life and student loans. A quiet mountain town seemed perfect. The drive up took 4 hours through winding forest roads. Remembrance Valley sat in a bowl between 3 peaks, with the town center clustered around a small lake. Victorian houses lined tree-covered streets, and everything looked like a postcard from 1950. The Historical Society building stood right downtown, a massive stone structure that looked more like a courthouse than a museum. When I walked through the front doors, I understood why the place was famous. The lobby walls were covered with family photographs going back to the 1800s, but these weren't typical historical photos. They showed intimate moments, children taking first steps, wedding nights, private conversations between couples. The level of detail was incredible. I could see tear stains on love letters displayed behind glass, read diary entries about secret fears and dreams. Mrs. Evelyn Burke, the society president, gave me the tour. She was probably 70, with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Your aunt did amazing work here," she said, leading me through room after room of displays. She had such a gift for finding the perfect documents to tell each family's story. The basement held the real treasure, row after row of filing cabinets containing what Mrs. Burke called the complete archive. Every family in town had detailed records going back generations: birth certificates, death records, business documents, but also personal letters, diary entries, even transcripts of private conversations. It was like they documented every moment of every life. "How did you get all this?" I asked, running my fingers along the cabinet labels. "Usually people don't save such personal things." Mrs. Burke's smile flickered for just a second. "Oh, families here are very good about preserving their history. It's part of our culture. Your aunt helped us organize everything properly." That evening, I explored Margaret's house. She'd left everything exactly as it was: books stacked on every surface, papers scattered across her desk, coffee cups growing mold in the sink. Her bedroom window faced the Historical Society, and I could see she'd hung blackout curtains to block the view. I found her personal journal hidden behind a loose floorboard in the closet. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Day 22,847. They made me process another batch today. A young father from Phoenix. They took his memories of his daughter's first words, Her first day of school, teaching her to ride a bike, left him with just the stress and worry. When he gets home, he won't understand why she feels like a stranger. The Burke family wanted wholesome parenting experiences for their grandson's file. My hands shook as I kept reading. I tried to warn visitors by hiding messages in the displays, but it knows. It always knows. The thing under the town watches everything. I can feel its tendrils in the walls, under the floors, behind every smile. It keeps me alive to do this work, but I'm not really living. I'm just a filing system for stolen memories. The journal went on for pages. Margaret described something she called the hunger, an ancient entity that had been feeding on human memories for 2 centuries. The original settlers had made some kind of deal after losing most of their families on the journey west. They'd prayed for help remembering their dead, and something answered. Not God. According to Margaret's notes, every building in town was connected to an underground network of organic tunnels. The entity could monitor everything, every word, every thought, every memory of anyone who stayed longer than 3 nights. Visitors would leave thinking they'd had a nice vacation, but parts of their lives would be gone forever. I should have packed up and left right then. But I'm a librarian. When I see a mystery, I have to solve it. And the journal mentioned equipment in the basement that could access the memory storage system. If this was real, if people were really being hurt, I had to do something. The next morning, I reported to work like nothing had happened. Mrs. Burke showed me my office, Margaret's old space in the basement, surrounded by those endless filing cabinets. She explained my duties, organize new acquisitions, catalog experiences by emotional intensity, and prepare memories for distribution to requesting families. Distribution? I asked. Oh yes, dear. Families often want to experience particularly meaningful memories that complement their own histories. Memories of success, love, achievement, the things that make life rich. Your aunt was wonderful at matching people with appropriate experiences. She handed me a stack of request forms. The Hendersons wanted memories of successful parenting moments for their teenage son. The Patricks requested romantic courtship experiences for their daughter's upcoming wedding. The whole thing was presented like a library catalog, but for stolen pieces of human lives. That afternoon, alone in the basement, I found Margaret's hidden equipment behind a false wall. Banks of servers hummed quietly, connected by cables that disappeared into holes drilled in the foundation. The main terminal showed a map of the underground network, thousands of hair-thin lines spreading throughout the town like blood vessels. I clicked on recent acquisitions. File after file of extracted memories, organized by date and emotional content. A businessman from Seattle. Memories of career advancement and financial security. A grandmother from Texas. Childhood recollections of family love and safety. A war veteran from Ohio. Experiences of brotherhood and survival resilience. Each file contained detailed notes about what had been taken and why. The veteran's entry made me sick. Subject possessed exceptional memories of overcoming trauma and building post-service life. Extracted. All recollections of healing process, supportive relationships and personal growth. Left. Combat trauma and isolation. Requesting family. Burke wants resilience, experiences for grandson entering military. The system was horrifying in its efficiency. The entity didn't just steal random memories. It carefully selected experiences that would leave victims damaged while providing the town's families with exactly what they wanted. Parents who lost memories of their children's milestones, couples who forgot their love stories, survivors who lost their hard-won strength. I found videos of the harvesting process. Visitors sleeping peacefully in the local bed and breakfast while invisible, tendrils connected to their skulls. The entity could extract specific experiences while leaving the person physically unharmed. They'd wake up feeling slightly off, maybe a little sad, but wouldn't realize what they'd lost until they got home. For 3 days, I pretended to do Margaret's job while learning the system. Mrs. Burke checked on me regularly, always smiling, always asking if I needed anything. The other townspeople were equally friendly, but there was something wrong with their eyes. They looked hungry, like they were waiting for something. On my 4th night, I understood what. I woke up feeling groggy, with a splitting headache. But instead of losing memories, I was gaining them. Margaret's experiences flooded my mind, her childhood in Remembrance Valley. her growing horror as she discovered the truth. 60 years of organizing stolen memories while the entity kept her prisoner. The download was intentional. The entity was preparing me to take over Margaret's role permanently. I saw through her eyes as townspeople came to her with requests, speaking about memories like merchandise. I want something romantic for my wedding anniversary. My son needs confidence. Do you have any achievement memories from successful businessmen? The children need more wholesome childhood experiences. Margaret had tried to refuse at first, but the entity had ways of encouraging cooperation. It showed her the alternative, watching the town's children grow up with fractured identities assembled from dozens of stolen experiences. Teenagers who couldn't tell which childhood memories were their own. Adults who'd never experienced genuine emotion because everything they felt came from someone else. The worst part was seeing how the memory trading had evolved. Initially, the entity had simply fed on experiences, but the townspeople had become addicted to the stolen memories. They traded among themselves constantly, swapping traumatic experiences for peaceful ones, exchanging failures for successes. None of them knew who they really were anymore. By dawn, I had a plan. If the entity couldn't distinguish between real and fake memories until they were already in the system, I could poison the entire network. I spent the next day creating false experiences, elaborate psychological traps disguised as valuable memories. I crafted memories of success that turned into recursive loops of failure, love stories that became infinite spirals of betrayal, childhood experiences where the child remembered being the parent who remembered being the child. Each false memory contained triggers that would activate when combined with others, creating impossible contradictions that would shatter any mind trying to process them. The monthly distribution ceremony was held in the Historical Society's main hall. The entire town gathered while Mrs. Burke uploaded new experiences into the central system. I'd replaced dozens of real memories with my poisoned versions, making sure they looked like premium acquisitions. "Tonight we have something special," Mrs. Burke announced. "Memories from a successful novelist, experiences of creative breakthrough and literary achievement, and some beautiful childhood memories from a family that clearly loved each other very much." The townspeople's eyes lit up as the corrupted experiences entered the system. Within hours, the entity began processing them, unable to detect the paradoxes until it was too late. The false memories spread through the network like a virus, contaminating everything they touched. By the third day, people throughout Remembrance Valley were experiencing severe psychological breaks. I watched from my office window as neighbors wandered the streets in confusion, unable to tell what was real. The entity's consciousness was fracturing as it tried to process impossible experiences, memories of being in multiple places at once, of living contradictory lives, of events that couldn't have happened. The memory storage system began collapsing. Stolen experiences started returning randomly to their original owners worldwide. People who'd visited Remembrance Valley years ago suddenly remembered their missing memories, along with the horrifying truth of what had happened to them. The entity's death throes were visible. The ground shook as the underground network collapsed. Buildings throughout town developed cracks as the organic tunnels beneath them disintegrated. The Historical Society's basement flooded with a black, oily substance that smelled like rotting memories. I barely escaped during the evacuation. The entire town was condemned after investigators found the remains of the underground network, miles of biological tunnels that defied scientific explanation. The FBI classified it as an environmental disaster, but I know they found Margaret's records. They know the truth. The investigation revealed similar operations in other locations, also small towns with unusually detailed historical records and populations of memory addicts. Most of the sites have been quietly evacuated and studied. The entities are real, and they're hungry. Victims who recovered their stolen memories often suffered severe psychological trauma. Imagine suddenly remembering 20 years of your child's life that you'd forgotten, or having love for your spouse return after decades of inexplicable emotional emptiness. Some families reunited, but many relationships couldn't survive the revelation of what had been lost. I still carry some of Margaret's memories. I remember her first day working at the Historical Society, how excited she was to preserve the town's history. I remember the moment she realized the truth and the 60 years of guilt that followed. Those borrowed memories remind me every day that some knowledge comes with a price. I've become an advocate for memory theft survivors, helping people cope with recovering stolen experiences. The research has led to new understanding of how memory shapes identity, but we're still learning the full implications. What we do know is that memory makes us human, and there are things in this world that want to take that humanity away, one precious experience at a time. Sometimes, I dream about Remembrance Valley, about the families still scattered across the country, trying to rebuild their identities from fragments of stolen lives. And sometimes, in those dreams, I can feel something watching from beneath the earth, patient and hungry, waiting for another opportunity to feed. Because the truth is, there are more towns like Remembrance Valley out there. More entities that have learned to harvest human experience. And they're always looking for new archivists, new people to organize their stolen treasures. So if you ever visit a small town with an unusually detailed historical museum, if the locals seem a little too interested in your personal stories, if you wake up feeling like you've forgotten something important, leave immediately. Some memories are worth more than you can imagine, and there are things that will do anything to take them from you. My name is David Martinez, and I've been a school custodian for 12 years. I started cleaning schools right after high school because I needed steady work to support my mom. I worked my way up from night janitor to head custodian at 3 different districts. I've cleaned up everything you can imagine. Sick kids, broken pipes, flooding classrooms, even a gas leak that could have killed everyone. I know schools inside and out, from the boiler rooms to the roof vents. But what happened when I moved to Eternal Springs Elementary in Montana changed everything I thought I knew about children. Some kids, I learned, aren't kids at all. It was August 2019 when I took the job. Mom had been diagnosed with dementia, and she'd moved to Eternal Springs years earlier for some kind of specialized care. The town was tiny, maybe 800 people, but the elementary school had 340 students. That didn't make sense. Most small towns are losing kids, not gaining them. But the pay was good, and I needed to be close to Mom. My first day, I was mopping the main hallway when I heard 2 first graders talking by their lockers. One kid, maybe 6 years old, was explaining the Cuban Missile Crisis to another kid. Not just there was a war, but actual details about Kennedy and Khrushchev, nuclear submarines, things I barely learned in high school. I figured maybe he'd watched some documentary with his parents. Then I heard the second kid respond. This 6-year-old girl starts talking about how the media covered it differently than the Bay of Pigs invasion, comparing news coverage like she'd lived through both events. I stopped mopping and listened closer. These kids were using words like geopolitical and nuclear deterrent. They sounded like college professors, not kindergartners. I mentioned it to Principal Hayes during my lunch break. She just smiled and said the kids in Eternal Springs were special and that parents moved here specifically for the educational opportunities. She said families made sacrifices to give their children advantages they couldn't get anywhere else. That afternoon, I was emptying trash in the 3rd grade classrooms when I overheard a parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Peterson was talking to the parents of a boy named Marcus. She was praising how well he was doing, but the parents seemed stressed. "We're just worried about his attitude lately," the mother said. "He keeps talking about things that happened before he was born. Yesterday he told me I was wrong about something that happened in my own childhood. He corrected me about events from 1987. He wasn't even born until 2011. Children have vivid imaginations," Mrs. Peterson replied. "And with the internet, they pick up all sorts of information." But the father shook his head. "It's not information from the internet. He knows things about our family that we never told him. Private things. Things that happened before we even moved to Eternal Springs." I kept cleaning, but I was listening to every word. The conversation went on for 20 minutes, with the parents describing how their 8-year-old son had knowledge that seemed impossible. Mrs. Peterson kept giving them the same calm responses, like she'd had this exact conversation before. After they left, I stayed late to finish the classroom. That's when I found something weird. In Marcus's desk, there was a notebook filled with handwriting that looked too advanced for a 3rd grader. I flipped through it, and my blood went cold. It was full of detailed notes about town politics, family histories going back decades, and financial information about local businesses. This kid had written analysis of the town's power structure that would impress a political science professor. But the strangest part was a section labeled Newcomer Assessment, D. Martinez. That was me. This 8-year-old had written 3 pages analyzing my background, my work history, even my mother's medical condition. Information I'd never shared with anyone in town. I took photos of the notebook pages with my phone and put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Walking to my truck, I kept thinking about those conversations I'd overheard. How did these kids know so much? And why were they keeping detailed files on adults? The next morning, I was unlocking the school at 6 a.m. when I heard voices coming from inside. That was impossible. I was always the first one in, and the night security system was still armed. I disabled the alarm and followed the sound to the basement level, where we kept maintenance supplies and the old fallout shelter from the 1950 seconds. The voices were coming from behind the boiler room. I grabbed my flashlight and investigated. There was a section of the basement I'd never noticed before, hidden behind some old filing cabinets. When I moved them aside, I found a door that led to a tunnel system I didn't know existed. The voices were clearer now. Children's voices, but they were discussing adult topics with sophisticated vocabulary. I heard them talking about real estate investments, political manipulation, and something called the Spring Protocol. I followed the tunnel as quietly as I could. The tunnel opened into a large underground room that looked like it had been carved out decades ago. There were about 30 children down there, ages 5 to 12, but they were conducting what looked like a business meeting. They had charts on the walls, financial documents spread across tables, and they were speaking with the intelligence and authority of adults. I watched from the tunnel entrance as a girl who couldn't have been older than 7 stood at the front of the room, giving a presentation about maintaining operational security and managing suspicious newcomers. When she mentioned my name, I realized they knew I was investigating them. "David Martinez has been documenting our activities," she said in a voice too mature for her. Small body. "He photographed Tommy's notebook and has been asking questions about family histories. We need to decide how to handle this situation." An older boy, maybe 10, raised his hand. "Have we considered recruitment? His mother is already part of the community. Integration might be simpler than elimination." Elimination. These children were casually discussing killing me like it was a business decision. Another girl spoke up. "The newcomer assessment shows he has strong family loyalty. If we can demonstrate value to his mother's care, he might become an asset rather than a threat." I backed away from the room as quietly as I could and made it back to the surface. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what I'd seen. These weren't normal children playing pretend. They were operating like a secret organization with decades of experience. I called in sick and drove straight to see my mother at the Eternal Springs Care Center. I needed answers, and she was the only person I trusted in this town. Mom seemed better than she had in months when I arrived. Her dementia symptoms were much less severe than they'd been before she moved here. She was alert, coherent, and happy to see me. "David, I'm so glad you took the job at the school," she said. "Now we can finally be a complete family again." "Mom, what do you mean by complete family?" She smiled and took my hand. "You'll understand soon. Tommy's been waiting so long to see you again." "Tommy? Mom, who's Tommy?" Her expression changed to confusion, then clarity, then something that looked like fear. "Tommy is your brother, David. Don't you remember your little brother?" I'd never had a brother. I was an only child. But Mom kept talking about Tommy like he'd always been part of our family. She showed me old photo albums I'd never seen before. Pictures of me as a kid with a younger boy who looked exactly like the 8-year-old from Marcus's desk description. "Mom, these photos, I don't remember having a brother. The adjustment period can be difficult," she said gently. "But the treatment here helps with memory integration. You'll remember everything soon." Treatment. Memory integration. Nothing she was saying made sense, but she seemed so certain, so calm. Like this was all perfectly normal. That's when Tommy walked into the room. He looked exactly like he did in the photos, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and my mother's eyes. But when he spoke, his voice carried weight and exhaustion that no child should have. "Hello, David. I've been waiting 71 years to meet you." I stood up so fast I knocked over my chair. "What did you say?" Tommy sat down across from me with the posture and presence of an adult. I said I've been waiting 71 years. I was 8 when Mom brought me to Eternal Springs in 1948. I've been 8 ever since. Mom nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. After we lost our first son to polio, I couldn't bear the thought of losing another child to the dangers of growing up. Eternal Springs offered a solution. What solution? My voice was barely a whisper. Tommy answered. The spring water stops aging at whatever point you choose. Most parents choose early childhood because it's safer. Children don't get cancer, don't have heart attacks, don't die in wars or car accidents. They stay innocent and protected forever. I looked at my mother, searching for any sign that this was a delusion brought on by her dementia. But her eyes were clear and focused. She believed every word. David, you need to understand, Tommy continued. The children you've been observing at school aren't really children. Some of them have been alive for almost a century. We've developed our own society, our own rules, our own methods of protecting what we've built here. You're talking about that meeting in the basement. You were discussing eliminating me. Tommy's expression didn't change. We've learned that normal humans often struggle to accept our existence. Some become dangerous. We've had to develop protective measures. Protective measures? You mean murder? We prefer to think of it as community defense. But yes, sometimes elimination becomes necessary. I backed toward the door, but Tommy continued talking. The spring water creates a physical dependence. Anyone who's consumed it regularly can't leave Eternal Springs without experiencing severe withdrawal. The pain is so intense that most people beg to return within days. How is that possible? We don't fully understand the mechanism. The spring water contains minerals that aren't found anywhere else on Earth. After years of consumption, your body becomes dependent on them. Without regular doses, the aging process doesn't just resume, it accelerates. Mom reached out to touch my arm. David, I've been giving you the spring water in your coffee every morning since you arrived. Just small doses to begin the integration process. The room started spinning. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. What integration process? The transition to eternal childhood, Tommy explained. It takes about 6 months of regular consumption before the dependency fully develops. You're almost halfway there. I ran. I left my mother's room and ran to my truck, my mind racing. 6 months of spring water meant I had maybe 3 months before I couldn't leave town. 3 months to figure out how to escape whatever these people had planned for me. But first, I needed to understand what I was really dealing with. That night, I broke into the school and went back to the tunnel system. This time, I brought proper equipment, night vision camera, audio recorder, and climbing gear in case I needed to escape quickly. The underground complex was much larger than I'd realized. There were dozens of rooms carved into the rock, some clearly decades old, others that looked recently constructed. I found laboratories, meeting rooms, and what looked like a small medical facility. In one room, I discovered files dating back to the 1940s. Documents about the town's founding, geological surveys of the spring, and detailed records of every family that had ever lived in Eternal Springs. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. Eternal Springs had been founded by parents who'd lost children to various tragedies, disease, accidents, war. They'd discovered a natural spring with unique properties that could halt aging, and they'd built a community around protecting their remaining children from ever experiencing those dangers. But over the decades, the children had evolved. The oldest ones, now approaching their centennial birthdays while trapped in young bodies, had developed intelligence and manipulation skills that their parents couldn't comprehend. They'd learned to control their families, the town government, and eventually the entire local economy. The files showed a pattern of accidents that had eliminated suspicious visitors, nosy journalists, and even family members who'd tried to leave. The children had perfected methods of causing deaths that looked completely innocent when performed by kids, poisonings that looked like allergic reactions, accidental falls, equipment failures that seemed like bad luck. But the most disturbing discovery was in the medical facility. I found holding cells containing children who clearly weren't from Eternal Springs. Dozens of kids, some who looked like they'd been there for months. These weren't eternal children. They were normal kids who'd been kidnapped from neighboring towns. The eternal children were using them as test subjects. I read through medical files that detailed experiments designed to replicate the spring water's effects artificially. Many of the test subjects had been damaged by failed procedures, i.e., children with partially halted aging who existed in constant pain, kids whose growth had been stunted in horrific ways. Some files mentioned children who died during testing. The eternal children had been disposing of bodies in the wilderness around town for years. I was photographing the evidence when I heard footsteps in the tunnel behind me. Multiple sets of small feet, moving with purpose. They'd found me. I grabbed as many files as I could carry and ran deeper into the complex, looking for another exit. Behind me, I could hear children's voices coordinating a search with military precision. Sector 7 is clear. Moving to Sector 8. Subject has evidence files. Priority is recovery, not elimination. Remember, we need him, conscious for memory adjustment. Memory adjustment. They weren't just planning to kill me. They wanted to alter my memories, make me compliant like my mother. I found an emergency exit that led to the town's storm drain system. I crawled through half a mile of concrete pipes before emerging near the town limits, covered in mud and terrified. But I had the evidence. The next morning, I drove to the state capitol and walked into the FBI field office. I showed them the photographs, the medical files, and the documentation of kidnapped children. At first, they thought I was delusional. But when they ran the missing children's names through their database, everything changed. Some of these kids had been missing for over a year. Amber alerts from across the region. The FBI had been looking for them everywhere except a tiny town in Montana where children never grew up. The federal investigation took 3 months to organize. They needed specialists in supernatural crimes, medical experts, and a tactical team trained for unusual situations. During that time, I stayed in protective custody in another state. But Tommy kept finding ways to contact me. Phone calls where he'd somehow gotten my protected number. Letters, delivered to locations where I was supposedly hidden. He kept trying to convince me that eternal childhood was a gift, not a curse. "David, you don't understand what you're destroying," he said in one call. "We've created a society without war, without aging, without death. We've solved humanity's greatest problems. By kidnapping and torturing children, by expanding our community, those children will thank us eventually. They'll live forever, never experiencing the pain and disappointment of adult life. You're insane." "I'm 8 years old, David. I've been 8 years old for 71 years. Do you think that kind of existence doesn't change how you see the world?" When federal agents finally raided Eternal Springs, the Eternal Children were ready. They'd rigged the entire town with explosives and chemical weapons. When they realized they couldn't maintain their secret anymore, they activated destruction protocols that killed dozens of residents and destroyed most of the evidence. Tommy and several other Eternal Children escaped during the chaos. They disappeared into what investigators later discovered was a network of similar communities across North America. Towns where age manipulation springs had been created artificially, controlled by ancient children with centuries of accumulated knowledge. The surviving, kidnapped children were rescued and returned to their families, but many suffered permanent psychological damage. Some had been partially affected by the aging halt experiments and required ongoing medical care. My mother aged rapidly after being cut off from the spring water. She experienced 70 years of delayed aging in just 4 months, but strangely, she seemed at peace. In her final weeks, she told me she was glad I'd stopped the Eternal Children, even though it meant losing Tommy again. "Some things are worth losing a child for," she said, "like making sure other children don't get taken." She died, quietly in her sleep, finally looking her actual age. That was 5 years ago. I still work as a school custodian, but now I'm also trained to identify potential Eternal Children. I work with federal investigators to track down the escaped ones and shut down their remaining operations. We've discovered that Tommy and his group have been infiltrating normal schools, using their innocent appearances to recruit new members and identify potential locations for new springs. Some of them have learned to temporarily age themselves into adult forms, allowing them to hold positions of authority while maintaining their supernatural advantages. The investigation has revealed that several historical figures who seemed to have unnaturally long careers were actually Eternal Children who'd been manipulating society for centuries. Politicians who served in government for decades, business leaders who controlled companies for unusually long periods, teachers who influenced generations of students, but some of them weren't aging normally. Tommy still contacts me occasionally. Letters, phone calls, emails that somehow bypass all security measures. He keeps trying to convince me to join their society, accept eternal childhood as what he calls the next step in human evolution. But I've seen what eternal childhood really means. I've seen the files from those underground laboratories, the psychological profiles of children whose minds broke under the weight of decades trapped in young bodies, the remains of kidnapped kids who died during failed experiments. The eternal children aren't evolved, they're damaged. 70 years of being 8 years old doesn't make you wise, it makes you something else entirely. Something that looks human, but thinks in ways that normal people can't understand or predict. Last week, I found a note in my apartment. Just 4 words, written in a child's handwriting. The spring still flows. They're still out there, still building their PRASA, network of age-controlled communities. Still kidnapping children for their experiments. Still believing they're creating a better world by trapping kids in eternal childhood. And somewhere out there, my 8-year-old brother, who's nearly a century old, is planning the next phase of their operation. I check my coffee every morning now before I drink it. I test every water source when I travel. Because I know that somewhere, Tommy is waiting for me to slip up. To consume even a small amount of spring water that would start the integration process all over again. He's patient. After all, he has forever. But I don't. And that might be the only advantage I have left. If you have children, watch them carefully. Listen to how they speak, what they know, how they interact with other kids. Because in a world where children can live for centuries while looking innocent and helpless, you can't always trust what you see. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones who look like they need protection. And sometimes, the children who never grow up are the ones you should fear the most. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been a mechanic for 12 years. I started working on cars when I was 16 in my dad's garage back in Ohio. I've fixed everything from broken-down pickup trucks to fancy sports cars that cost more than most people's houses. I've seen engines catch fire, brakes fail completely, and cars that looked perfect on the outside but were death traps waiting to happen. But what happened in the summer of 2023 inches, a small town called Keepsake, changed everything I thought I knew about people and what they're willing to do for money. Some secrets are worth killing for, and some towns will do anything to protect their way of life. My cousin Jake had been calling me for months, asking me to come help him with his auto repair shop. He said business was booming in Keepsake, a small town about 3 hours outside of Denver. The pay was good, really good actually. Almost too good for a tiny place in the middle of nowhere. But Jake was family, and I needed a fresh start after my divorce. So I packed up my tools, loaded my pickup truck, and drove out to see what this mysterious boom town was all about. Keepsake looked like any other small town when I first arrived. Main Street had maybe 20 businesses, a diner, a post office, 3 antique shops, and Jake's garage right on the corner. The population sign said 847 people, but the place felt busy. Cars parked everywhere. People walking around with shopping bags. For a town in the middle of farmland, it sure had a lot of visitors. Jake met me at the garage with a huge smile. He looked good, better than I'd seen him in years. New clothes, expensive watch, even his teeth looked different. Like he'd been to the dentist for the first time in his life. "Marcus, man, am I glad to see you," he said, giving me a hug that lifted me off the ground. "This place is going to change your life, just like it changed mine." The garage was impressive. Brand new equipment everywhere. Hydraulic lifts that must have cost $30,000 each. Computer diagnostic machines I'd only seen in dealerships. Air compressors that ran so quiet you could barely hear them. This wasn't some small town shop. This was professional grade everything. "Jake, how the hell did you afford all this?" I asked, running my hand along a tool cabinet that probably cost more than my truck. He laughed and clapped me on the back. "That's the beauty of Keepsake, cousin. This town knows how to make money, real money. And if you're smart and keep your mouth shut, you can make it too." That first week, I mostly just watched and learned. Jake had 3 other mechanics working for him, all local guys who'd been there for years. They were friendly enough, but there was something weird about how they talked. Always mentioning their collections. Tom collected old pocket watches. Dave collected vintage baseball cards. Even Sarah, who did the bookkeeping, collected antique jewelry. Everyone in town seemed to collect something, and their collections were incredible. I'm talking museum-quality stuff. Tom showed me a pocket watch from 1885 that he said was worth $20,000. Dave had a Mickey Mantle rookie card in perfect condition. Sarah wore earrings that looked like they belonged on a movie star. The weird part was where they got this stuff. None of them seemed rich enough to afford collections like that. Tom worked part-time at the garage and part-time at the gas station. Dave was a janitor at the school. Sarah did books for half the businesses in town, but that couldn't pay enough for jewelry worth more than my house. When I asked Jake about it, he just smiled and said, "People in Keepsake are very good at finding valuable things, and we help each other out. You'll understand soon enough." The first thing that really bothered me happened on my third day. I was working on a transmission when a woman came into the shop. She was probably 60, well-dressed, crying quietly. She asked Jake if he'd seen her husband's watch, said it was a family heirloom that had been missing since he passed away at the hospital 2 weeks ago. Jake was very sympathetic. He helped her look around the shop, even though it was obvious the watch wasn't there. After she left, I saw Tom quickly put something in his pocket. When I asked him about it later, he just shrugged and said the woman was confused. Old people lose things all the time. But that night, I saw Tom showing Dave a pocket watch that looked exactly like what the woman had described. When I mentioned it to Jake, his face got serious for the first time since I'd arrived. "Marcus, let me give you some advice," he said. "In Keepsake, we mind our own business. People here have been taking care of each other for a long time. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any." I should have left right then. Should have packed up my tools and driven back to Ohio. But the money was too good, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe lots of people had pocket watches like that. 2 days later, I saw Dave wearing a baseball cap with a team logo I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he said it belonged to a kid who died in a car accident. The boy's family had donated it to him. But something about the way he said it didn't feel right. That weekend, Jake invited me to his house for dinner. He lived in a beautiful Victorian home on the edge of town. Inside, it was like a museum. Antique furniture, vintage photographs, collectible books on every shelf. Everything looked expensive and old and important. "Jake, this stuff must be worth a fortune," I said, looking at a grandfather clock in the corner. "It is," he said, pouring us both a beer. "That clock alone is worth $40,000. Got it from an estate sale last month." "What kind of estate sale has stuff like this?" Jake sat down across from me, and his expression changed. He looked serious, almost sad. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. This town has been special for a long time. Since the 1942, when my grandfather and his friends started it, they came here with nothing after losing their farms in the Dust Bowl. They had to figure out how to survive." He took a long drink of his beer and continued. "They started by collecting things from abandoned farms. Furniture, tools, anything valuable that families left behind when they couldn't pay their mortgages. Then they learned that people in hospitals and nursing homes often died with no family to claim their belongings. So they made friends with the staff. Started helping out. I felt a cold feeling in my stomach. Helping out how? At first, it was harmless. Someone would die, and instead of throwing away their personal things, the staff would bring them here. We'd clean them up, research their value, and sell them to collectors. The staff got a cut, we got a cut, and valuable things found new homes instead of ending up in dumpsters. But," Jake looked down at his hands, "but then we realized that some things are worth more than others. Items connected to tragedy or strong emotions. A wedding ring from someone who died young, a toy from a child who passed away, a photograph from a family that died in an accident. Collectors pay premium prices for things with stories like that." The cold feeling was spreading through my whole body now. "Jake, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that over the years, this town has developed relationships with people who work in hospitals, nursing homes, funeral directors, even police departments. People who let us know when valuable items become available. And we've gotten very good at acquiring them." I stood up, my head spinning. "You're talking about stealing from dead people." "We're talking about survival," Jake said firmly, "and about giving valuable items the respect they deserve. Do you think it's better for a priceless family heirloom to sit in some hospital storage room until it gets thrown away? Or should it go to a collector who will treasure it? It should go to the family." What if there is no family? What if the family doesn't want it? What if they need money more than they need old photographs? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My cousin, who I'd grown up with, who I'd trusted, was calmly explaining how he stole from grieving families. "I need some air," I said, walking toward the door. "Marcus, wait." Jake followed me outside. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to understand something. This isn't just about money. The people in this town, we've become a family. We take care of each other. And sometimes that means doing things that other people might not understand. Like stealing from dead children?" Jake's face got hard. "Like making sure our families can eat. Like making sure our kids can go to college. Like building something that lasts." I walked back to my motel room that night, feeling sick. But I also felt confused. Jake wasn't a bad person. I'd known him my whole life. He'd helped me through my divorce, lent me money when I was broke, always been there for family. How could someone like that be involved in something so horrible? The next morning, I decided to look around town with fresh eyes. I visited the antique shops on Main Street. The quality of the items was incredible. Things that should have been in museums or private estates: a Civil War sword, a wedding dress from the 1922, jewelry that looked like it belonged to wealthy families. I asked the shop owner where she got such amazing pieces. "Oh, we have very good relationships with estate buyers throughout the region," she said. "People who know quality when they see it. Must be expensive to buy things like this." She smiled. "We have arrangements that work for everyone involved." That afternoon, I followed Tom when he left work early. He drove to a nursing home about 30 miles outside of town. I watched from my truck as he went inside carrying a small bag. 20 minutes later, he came out with the bag looking much fuller. When he got back to town, I followed him to his house. Through his window, I saw him unpacking the bag. Jewelry, photographs, small collectibles. Things that had obviously belonged to people in the nursing home. I felt like I was going to throw up. That night, I called Jake and told him I knew what was happening. "Good," he said. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Now we can talk honestly." He picked me up an hour later and drove me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, it was like a treasure cave. Thousands of items organized on shelves and in boxes. Each item had a tag with information about where it came from and how much it was worth. "This is our main distribution center," Jake explained. "We process about 2,000 items a month, everything from jewelry to furniture to collectibles. Our network covers 6 states now." I picked up a small jewelry box. The tag said it had come from St. Mary's Hospital, room 314, patient deceased the 15th of October 2023. No next of kin, value $800. "Jake, this person died 2 weeks ago, and their jewelry box was going to be thrown away. Now it's going to make someone happy, and it's going to help pay for Tom's daughter's college tuition." I set the box down carefully. What about their family? What if they had relatives who would have wanted this? We check very carefully. We only take items from people who truly have no one, or from families who don't want the belongings. "How do you know they don't want them?" Jake hesitated. "Sometimes we ask, sometimes we make educated guesses, and sometimes you just take them. Marcus, you have to understand, this system has worked for 70 years. It's kept this town alive when other, small towns were dying. It's given hundreds of families a good life, and it's saved thousands of valuable items from being destroyed." I looked around the warehouse again. There were wedding rings, family photographs, military medals, children's toys. Each item represented someone's life, someone's memories, someone's love. "Show me the records," I said. Jake led me to an office area where several people were working on computers. They had detailed files on every item: where it came from, who the original owner was, how they had died, whether they had family. What I saw made my blood run cold. Many of the people had family, sons and daughters who lived in other states, grandchildren who probably didn't even know their relative had died. The records showed that Keepsake had people working in hospitals and nursing homes who would steal items within hours of someone's death before the family could even be notified. "Jake, these people had families. They had people who would have wanted these things. Families who hadn't visited in years. Families who put their relatives in nursing homes and forgot about them. Were not hurting anyone." But as I kept reading, I found records that were much worse. Items taken from people who were still alive but in comas. Jewelry stolen from patients with dementia who couldn't report it missing. Photographs taken from children's hospital rooms while the kids were in surgery. "This is evil," I whispered. "This is business," Jake said firmly. "And if you want to be part of it, you need to understand that sometimes we have to make difficult decisions." I turned to look at him. "What kind of difficult decisions?" Jake's expression changed again. He looked nervous now, like he'd said too much. "Sometimes people get in our way. Sometimes families try to cause problems. Sometimes competitors try to move into our territory. What do you do when that happens?" "We protect what's ours." "The way?" He said. It made my skin crawl. "Jake, have you hurt people?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I've done what I had to do to protect my family and my community. I felt the warehouse spinning around me. You've killed people. I've prevented problems from becoming bigger problems." I ran for the exit, but Jake caught my arm. "Marcus, you can't leave. Not now. You know too much." "I'm not going to tell anyone. I just want to go home." "That's not how this works. You're either part of the family or you're a threat to the family, and we don't allow threats." For the first time since I'd arrived in Keepsake, I was genuinely scared. Not just disgusted or angry, but afraid for my life. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have two choices. You can join us, make more money than you've ever dreamed of, and help us continue building something amazing. Or you can become another tragic accident that helps us acquire new inventory." I stared at my cousin, someone I'd loved and trusted my entire life, and realized I was looking at a stranger. A stranger who had just threatened to kill me. "I need time to think," I said. "You have until tomorrow morning." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my motel room trying to figure out how to get out of town alive. Jake had made it clear that they'd killed people before. They had connections with police, funeral directors, hospital staff. If they wanted to make me disappear, they probably could. But I also knew I couldn't let this continue. Thousands of families had been robbed of their most precious possessions. People had died for their collections. This wasn't just theft anymore. It was murder. I decided to take a chance. At 3 a.m, I snuck out of the motel and drove to the state police barracks 50 miles away. I told them everything. About the warehouse, the stolen items, the network of people in hospitals and nursing homes, and Jake's threats. The trooper I talked to was skeptical at first. Small-town theft wasn't usually their problem. But when I mentioned the murders and showed him photos I'd secretly taken in the warehouse, his attitude changed quickly. 2 days later, federal agents raided Keepsake. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. The warehouse contained over $1 million worth of stolen items. Computer records showed theft operations in 6 states involving dozens of hospitals, nursing homes, and funeral facilities. And they found evidence of at least 15 murders committed to acquire valuable collections. Jake was arrested trying to flee town with a truck full of the most valuable items. When they searched his house, they found detailed plans for my accident. He was going to sabotage my truck's brakes and make it look like mechanical failure. During the investigation, other town residents started confessing. They told stories about murders disguised as natural deaths, house fires set to cover thefts, and accidents arranged to eliminate competition. The town of Keepsake had been running a murder-for-profit operation for decades. The psychological evaluations were the most disturbing part. Many of the collectors had become addicted to owning items connected to tragedy. They specifically sought out jewelry from accident victims, toys from dead children, and photographs from destroyed families. The emotional weight of other people's grief had become a drug for them. Some of the stolen items were returned to families who had given up hope of ever seeing them again. A woman got back her mother's wedding ring that had been stolen from the hospital the day she died. A man recovered his son's baseball collection that had disappeared after the boy's funeral. Watching those reunions was the only good thing that came out of the whole nightmare. Jake was sentenced to life in prison. He never apologized, never showed remorse. At his sentencing, he said the town had done more good than harm by preserving valuable items that would have been destroyed. The town of Keepsake was essentially abandoned. Most of the buildings were demolished after investigators found human remains buried under several properties. The few residents who weren't arrested moved away and changed their names. I moved back to Ohio, and opened my own garage. But I volunteer now with organizations that help families recover stolen items and investigate suspicious antique dealers. We've identified at least 30 other communities where similar operations might be happening. The experience taught me something horrible about human nature. When people become obsessed with owning things, especially things connected to other people's pain, they can justify almost anything. They can steal from grieving families, murder innocent people, and destroy entire communities, all while convincing themselves they're doing good. I still get threatening phone calls sometimes. Former keepsake residents who escaped prosecution and blame me for destroying their profitable business. They don't understand that what they were doing was evil. They only understand that they lost their source of income. But the calls don't scare me anymore, because I know that every family who got their stolen belongings back, every murder victim who finally got justice, and every potential victim who was saved makes it worth the risk. Some things in this world are more valuable than money. And sometimes, the only way to protect those things is to stand up to the people who would steal them, no matter how dangerous they are. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've learned that the most valuable collection anyone can have is a clear conscience. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been working in construction for 15 years. Started as a carpenter's apprentice right out of high school, worked my way up through framing, finish work, and renovation projects. I've built houses, fixed roofs, and restored old buildings that most people would tear down. I thought I'd seen everything: rotting foundations, dangerous electrical work, structures that should have collapsed years ago. But what happened in Absolution changed everything I thought I knew about what can hide inside walls. Some buildings aren't just old, they're hungry. It was March 2023 when I got the call about Street Mary's Church in Absolution. Small town in Montana, population maybe 800 people. The parish needed a new maintenance worker. The previous guy, Tom Henderson, had died suddenly, heart attack, while working on the heating system. Poor guy was only 52. Father McKenna sounded tired on the phone. Really tired, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He offered good money though. $3,000 a month plus housing in the rectory basement. For a town that size, that was generous. Too generous, maybe. But I needed the work. Absolution was one of those places you drive through without stopping. Main Street had a gas station, a diner, and not much else. The church sat on a hill overlooking everything, old stone building with a bell tower that had seen better days. Built in 1887, according to the cornerstone. Father McKenna met me at the front door. He was a thin man, maybe 65, with gray hair and deep circles under his eyes. His handshake was weak, like he was holding something heavy. He kept checking his watch and glancing toward the confessional booth in the corner. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. His voice shook a little. "We really need someone who knows their way around old buildings." He showed me around the church. The heating system was ancient, but functional. Electrical work was mostly up to code, standard maintenance stuff. But when we got to the confessional booth, I stopped. The thing was wrong. I mean, it looked normal enough: dark wood, carved details, 2 small chambers with a screen between them. But the construction was weird. The walls were thicker than they needed to be, with spaces that didn't make sense. And the acoustics were strange. When Father McKenna spoke from the priest's side, his voice seemed to echo from places it shouldn't. "The booth was built with the church," he said, watching me examine the joint work. "Original construction. We've never modified it." I ran my hand along the wood grain. "Who built this?" "The craftsmanship is unusual. The original parish records were lost in a fire decades ago, but it served the community well." I noticed something else. The floor around the confessional was worn smooth, like thousands of people had knelt there over the years. More wear than you'd expect, even for a church that old. That first week, I focused on basic repairs. Loose floorboards, drafty windows, a stubborn door in the vestry. Normal stuff. But I kept noticing things that felt off. The townspeople talked about confession differently than anywhere else I'd been. They'd mention it with this weird reverence, like it was some kind of miracle cure. Changed my whole life. One woman told me at the diner. "Haven't felt a moment's guilt since." "Must be nice," I said. "I still feel bad about lying to my mom about eating cookies when I was 8. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You shouldn't carry that kind of weight. That's what confession is for. But here's the thing, she said it like guilt was some kind of disease, something unnatural. Not like the healthy remorse that keeps people from doing terrible things. Father McKenna was getting worse. I'd see him in the church at all hours, just sitting in a pew and staring at nothing. During confession times, Tuesday and dollars. Saturday evenings, plus after Sunday Mass, he'd go into that booth, looking tired, and come out looking like he'd aged 10 years. I asked him about it one day while I was fixing a window near the confessional. "Father, are you feeling okay? You seem really stressed." He didn't answer right away, just sat down heavily in the front pew and put his head in his hands. "Jake, how long have you been in absolution?" "About 3 weeks now." "Have you noticed anything unusual about the people here?" I thought about it. They're really calm, peaceful, I guess. Not what you'd expect from a town with this much crime. His head snapped up. "Crime? Well, yeah. I was looking at police reports for insurance purposes. This place has had some serious incidents over the years. Murders, sexual assaults, child abuse cases. But everyone acts like they're living in paradise." Father McKenna went very pale. "The police reports are public record? The recent ones? Sure. There was a murder just 2 years ago. Man named Stevens killed his wife and daughter. Case is still open." "David Stevens," Father McKenna whispered. "He confessed to me." "He confessed? Then why didn't you?" "I can't break the seal of confession, you know that." But something in his voice didn't sound right. It wasn't just about religious rules. It was like he physically couldn't talk about it. That night, I heard noises coming from the church. Not break-in sounds, more like someone moving around carefully. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check. Father McKenna was in the confessional booth, but he was alone, sitting in the priest's side with his head against the screen, whispering to himself. I couldn't make out the words, but he sounded desperate, like he was begging someone to stop. I didn't say anything, just watched from the doorway as he sat there for almost an hour, talking to empty air. The next morning, I started paying closer attention to the booth itself. The construction was definitely unusual, hidden compartments built into the walls, acoustic chambers that didn't belong in a simple confessional. Someone had put serious thought into how sound would travel through this thing. I found the first journal by accident. I was checking the basement for water damage when I noticed a loose stone in the foundation wall. Behind it was a metal box containing a leather notebook. Father McKenna's handwriting. March 15th, 1993. My first week at St. Mary's. Father Donovan seemed relieved to retire, almost eager to leave. He kept warning me about the confessional, saying I needed to be strong. I thought he meant spiritually strong. I was wrong. April 2nd, 1993. Something is happening during confessions. When people tell me about their sins, I can feel their guilt leaving them. Actually feel it, like a weight settling on my shoulders. Mrs. Patterson confessed to stealing from her employer. When she left, she was smiling. I haven't smiled since. June 10th, 1993. I tried to refuse confession to Martin Cruz. He confessed to raping his neighbor's daughter last month. I could feel his shame, his horror at what he'd done, flowing into me like water. When he walked out, he was whistling. I haven't slept through the night since. I dream about what he did. I feel like I did it myself. The journal went on for pages. Years of entries. Father McKenna describing how confession worked in absolution, tenation. Not like absolution at all, but like some kind of transfer. People would come in carrying the weight of terrible crimes, and somehow that weight would move to him instead, and the crimes were getting worse. December 3rd, 1998. Thomas Burke confessed to murdering the family in Kalispell. Said he'd driven here because something was calling him. When I asked what, he just said the church felt like home. He gave me details about how he killed them, their last words, how the children cried. Now I carry those memories like they're my own. January 15th, 2001, I tried to leave today. Packed my bags, wrote my resignation letter, but when I got to the town limits, I collapsed. Felt like every sin I'd absorbed was happening to me at once. Saw myself committing murders, raping children, burning down houses with families inside. The pain was unbearable. I turned around and came back, The visions stopped as soon as I entered the church. I kept reading. Entry after entry describing how criminals were drawn to absolution from all over the region, how they'd confess their crimes and walk away free, while Father McKenna absorbed not just their guilt, but their memories, their experiences, their victims' final moments. The latest entries were barely legible. His handwriting was shaky, desperate. February 10th, 2023. I can't distinguish between my memories and theirs anymore. Sometimes I think I killed those people myself. I remember the feeling of the knife going in, the sound they made when they died. But I know I never left this church. I know it was someone else's hands, someone else's choice, but the guilt feels so real. February 28th, 2023. Tom Henderson asked too many questions about the confessional. Started measuring the walls, taking pictures. I found him in the basement with tools, trying to dig. He said he heard voices coming from under the foundation. The next day he was dead. Heart attack, the coroner said. But I know better. It doesn't like people getting too close to the truth. That last entry was dated just a few days before I arrived. I put the journal back and started looking around the basement more carefully. Tom Henderson had been digging. All right. There was a section of the floor where the concrete was newer, hastily patched. Under that, I could hear something. Not voices exactly, but a kind of humming, like electrical wires, but deeper. I went back to Father McKenna's room and found more journals, dozens of them, going back 30 years. The full story was there, written in his increasingly erratic handwriting. The church had been built over a natural cave system. But these weren't normal caves. Something lived down there, something that fed on human shame and guilt. The confessional booth had been designed specifically to channel those emotions downward, like a funnel. Father McKenna had figured out the truth gradually. The thing in the caves was ancient, probably there long before the church was built. It had influenced the church's design, maybe even influenced the town's founding. It needed a constant supply of guilt and shame to survive, and it needed a human vessel to process and concentrate those emotions. That vessel was the priest. July 4th, 2010. I understand now why previous priests died so young. Father Donovan lasted 12 years. Father Michaels before him made it 8. The record is Father Benedict, with B. 17 years before he threw himself from the bell tower. I've been here 17 years now. I should have died long ago, but it's keeping me alive, sustaining me somehow. It needs me functional. The entity could extend a priest's life, but only to a point. Eventually, the accumulated guilt would break them completely. When that happened, it would need a replacement. November 11th, 2015. It's getting stronger. More people are coming to town now. Criminals from 3 states away, all drawn here by something they can't explain. They commit their crimes elsewhere, then drive here to confess. The cave system is expanding too. I can hear it at night, digging new tunnels. Growing. March 3rd, 2018. I found the crystallized guilt today. Broke through the floor in the basement storage room and saw them, black crystals covering the cave walls like glass. Each one contains a confession, a crime, a victim's final moment. There are thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. This has been going on much longer than I thought. The journal described how the entity stored guilt in physical form. Every confession created one of these black crystals, preserving not just the crime, but the emotional impact. The creature could access these stored experiences, use them to influence new visitors. It would project the memories of past crimes into people's minds, inspiring them to commit similar acts. It was creating a cycle: generate crime, absorb guilt, use stored guilt to inspire more crime. And the town of Absolution was its base of operations. But that wasn't the worst part. September 15th, 2020. The children born here are different. I've been watching them for years now, documenting the changes. They don't develop normal empathy. They can hurt animals, hurt other children, and feel nothing. The entity's influence is affecting human development itself. It's breeding a generation of natural-born criminals. December 1st, 2021. Tested my theory today. Took little Sarah Miller, D years, 8 years old, born here, to see an injured bird. Normal children would feel sympathy, want to help. Sarah suggested we pull its wings off to see what happens. No emotional response at all. Her parents think she's just curious about science. The entity wasn't just feeding on guilt. It was eliminating the human capacity for guilt entirely, creating people who could commit terrible crimes without psychological consequences. And it was passing that change down through generations. I found Father McKenna's final entry, dated 3 days ago, March 20th, 2023. I can't hold on much longer. Jake is asking questions, just like Tom did. The entity is getting impatient. It wants a replacement, and it doesn't care about religious training anymore. It just needs someone close to the confessional system, someone it can break down gradually. I have to warn him, but I don't know how. Every time I try to talk about it directly, the words won't come. It won't let me. I put down the journal and realized Father McKenna was standing in the doorway. "You found them," he said. His voice was different now, hollow. "Father, we need to call someone. The police, the FBI, someone." He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. It won't let us. Anyone who gets too close to the truth." He gestured vaguely. "Tom Henderson got too close. You're saying this thing killed him? Heart attack. But caused by stress, by fear. It can make you experience every crime you've absorbed all at once. The human mind can't handle that kind of guilt. It literally stops your heart." I looked at this man who had been carrying the emotional weight of thousands of crimes for 30 years. He should have been dead, should have broken completely. But something was keeping him functional, keeping him alive just long enough to serve his purpose. "Father, there has to be a way to fight this. I've tried everything. Prayer, exorcism, trying to leave town. Nothing works. It's too strong, too deeply rooted. And now it wants you." As if on cue, I felt something. A presence pressing against my mind. Whispers that weren't quite words, promising relief from every bad thing I'd ever done. Every guilt, every regret, every moment of shame, it could all go away. All I had to do was sit in that confessional booth and listen. "No," I said out loud. The presence pressed harder, and suddenly I was overwhelmed with memories that weren't mine. I saw through a killer's eyes, felt the satisfaction of taking a life, experienced the power of causing pain. For just a moment, I understood why someone might want to get rid of that kind of guilt. Then, Father McKenna grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to it. Once you start, you can't stop." "How do we destroy it?" "I don't know if we can. But maybe we can stop it from spreading. The cave system, that's where it lives. If we could collapse the caves, destroy the crystals." "I know explosives," I said. "Construction work. We could bring the whole thing down. It won't let us get that close. And even if we could, destroying all that stored guilt at once." He shuddered. "Every person who ever confessed here would feel their crimes again. All at the same time. The psychological shock would kill most of them." "Father, look around. This thing is turning children into psychopaths. It's drawn criminals here for over a century. How many people have died because of what this place enables?" He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "Sunday is the busiest confession day. If we time it right, when most of the townspeople are in the church, they'll all be affected at once. It might be our only chance to catch them before they can run." We spent the next 2 days planning. I had enough explosives left over from a demolition job to bring down the cave system. Father McKenna used his access to map out the underground passages. The creature seemed distracted during confession times, focused on processing the incoming guilt. That would be our window. Sunday morning, the church was packed. More people than I'd seen since arriving in town. All of them waiting for confession, waiting to unload their guilt onto Father McKenna one more time. I was in the basement with the explosives when I heard Father McKenna start the confessions. One by one, people filed into the booth. I could hear their voices through the walls, calm, matter-of-fact descriptions of terrible crimes. Murder, rape, child abuse, arson, all delivered in the same tone you'd use to describe grocery shopping. And with each confession, I could feel the entity getting stronger. The crystals in the cave walls pulsed with dark light. The humming sound grew louder. I set the charges at key structural points throughout the cave system. The entity was so focused on feeding that it didn't notice me until I was almost finished. Then it hit me with everything it had. Every crime ever confessed in that church flooded my mind at once. I experienced hundreds of murders from the killer's perspective. Felt the satisfaction of causing pain, the thrill of taking power over helpless victims. For a moment, I understood why people were drawn to absolution. The relief of not feeling that kind of guilt was overwhelming. But I also felt something else. The victims' experiences. Their fear, their pain, their final moments. The entity only absorbed guilt from the criminals. It left the victims suffering untouched, unprocessed, raw. That's what gave me the strength to set off the explosives. The cave system collapsed in a series of rolling explosions. Every crystal on the walls shattered simultaneously, releasing 30 years of stored guilt back into the world all at once. The psychological shockwave hit the church like a physical force. I heard screaming from upstairs. Not pain, realization. Every person who had ever used the confessional system suddenly felt the full weight of their crimes without the supernatural buffer they'd relied on for years. David Stevens, who had killed his wife and daughter, collapsed in the church aisle, sobbing uncontrollably as he experienced their terror for the first time. Maria Santos, who had been running a child abuse ring, started clawing at her face as she felt her victim's pain. Robert Chen, who had committed 17 murders across 3 states, went completely catatonic. Father McKenna found me in the basement wreckage. He looked different, still exhausted, but like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Is it over?" he asked. "I think so. The caves are gone, the crystals are destroyed. And the people upstairs? We could still hear crying, screaming, the sounds of complete psychological breakdown. They're feeling their crimes for the first time in years, maybe decades." Within hours, Absolution was swarming with emergency responders, paramedics, mental health crisis teams, law enforcement. Word had gotten out about the mass confessions, AGS. Dozens of people voluntarily admitting to serious crimes while experiencing complete emotional collapse. The FBI took over the investigation when they realized the scope of what had been happening. A single small town had been harboring hundreds of fugitives for over a century. Cold cases from across the region were suddenly solved as residents confessed to crimes they'd committed decades ago. But not everyone survived the return of their guilt. 17 people committed suicide in the first 48 hours. Others suffered complete mental breakdowns and had to be institutionalized. A few, like Stevens, turned themselves in to authorities and are serving life sentences. The children born in Absolution were removed from their families and placed in special treatment programs. Psychologists are still studying them, trying to understand how to reverse the developmental damage caused by the entity's influence. Father McKenna retired immediately and entered a psychiatric facility. He's getting better, slowly learning to distinguish between his own memories and the crimes he absorbed over 30 years. He may never fully recover. As for me, I spent 6 months in therapy trying to process what I'd experienced in those caves. The brief contact with the entity left me with fragments of other people's guilt, other people's crimes. I still have nightmares about murders I never committed, still feel responsible for pain I never caused. The town of Absolution was evacuated and declared a psychological hazard zone. Government researchers are still studying the site, trying to understand how supernatural entities can influence human development and moral reasoning. I've worked with them to identify other locations where similar creatures might be operating. We look for religious communities with unusually low crime reporting rates, places where people seem to live without normal guilt or remorse. We've found 3 more sites so far. Each one had its own system for harvesting human shame, its own method of creating communities free from psychological consequences. We're working on containing them, but it's slow, careful work. The experience taught me something important about guilt and forgiveness. Guilt serves a purpose. It stops us from becoming monsters. When you remove that natural brake on human behavior, when you make it possible to commit terrible crimes without psychological consequences, you don't create paradise, you create hell. And sometimes, that hell can literally dig its way to the surface. I still work in construction, but now I volunteer with organizations that help communities recover from supernatural manipulation. Because I learned that some buildings aren't just structures, they're traps, designed to catch human souls and feed on human suffering. The weight of confessions was never meant to disappear. It was meant to be carried, to be learned from, to keep us human. In Absolution, we almost forgot what it means to be human at all. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I've been a veterinarian for 12 years. I graduated from UC Davis with top grades and spent 5 years working at emergency animal hospitals in San Francisco. I've saved dogs hit by cars, helped cats through difficult births, and treated everything from poisonous snake bites to broken bones. I thought I'd seen it all, but what happened when I moved to Harmony Hills in March 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about life itself. Because what I discovered in that small town wasn't just about animals, it was about something far worse than any creature I'd ever treated. I took over the Harmony Hills Animal Clinic from Dr. Peterson, who had run it for 40 years before retiring. The town seemed perfect, small, quiet, surrounded by beautiful mountains. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where kids can play outside safely, and where nothing bad ever happens. At least, that's what I thought when I first drove down Main Street with my moving truck following behind. The clinic was exactly what I'd always wanted. A 2-story brick building with large windows, modern equipment, and a surgery room that was better than some I'd seen in the city. Dr. Peterson had taken good care of the place. The exam tables were solid steel, the X-ray machine was only 3 years old, and the medicine storage room was perfectly organized. Everything smelled like fresh paint and disinfectant. But right from my first week, I noticed something strange about the town. Every family seemed to have at least one child who was different. Not disabled or sick, the opposite. These kids were stronger, faster, and smarter than any children I'd ever seen. 10-year-olds who could lift heavy boxes that grown men struggled with. Teenagers who ran so fast they looked like blurs. Kids who could hear whispered conversations from across the street. At first, I thought it was just good genetics or maybe the clean mountain air. The parents were incredibly proud of these children. They called them blessed and special gifts. During my first town meeting, I watched a 12-year-old girl named Emma lift a folding table by herself. A table that should have taken 2 adults to move. Everyone clapped and cheered like it was the most normal thing in the world. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the bakery, bragged about her son Tommy being able to see in complete darkness. "He can read a book with no lights on at all," she said, beaming with pride. "Never even needs a flashlight when he goes camping." The other parents nodded and smiled, sharing similar stories about their own children's amazing abilities. But what really bothered me was how these special children looked. Emma, the strong girl, had eyes that were bright yellow instead of brown or blue. Tommy, who could see in the dark, had teeth that seemed too sharp, too pointed. Another boy named Marcus had skin that felt ice cold when I shook his hand, even though it was summer. I started keeping track of what I saw. Nearly every family in town had one of these enhanced children. They dominated every sport in school, got perfect grades without studying, and could do things that seemed impossible. The high school football team was undefeated for 15 years running. The track team held state records in every event. Academic competitions weren't even close. Harmony Hills students won everything. During my second month in town, I was treating a family's dog when their 15-year-old daughter, Chloe, helped hold the animal down. The dog was a large German Shepherd who was fighting against the examination, but Chloe controlled him easily with one hand. Her grip was so strong that I could see small dents where her fingers pressed into the dog's fur. When she smiled at me, I noticed she had an extra row of teeth behind her normal ones. "How long has she been so strong?" I asked her mother quietly. "Oh, since she was little, Mrs. Davis replied, cheerfully. "All our children are blessed that way. It runs in the family." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I decided to research the town's history, thinking maybe there was something in the water or soil that could explain these unusual traits. What I found in the library's old records changed everything. Harmony Hills was founded in 1954 by just 12 families. According to the town records, these families had all been recruited by something called the American Genetic Enhancement Project. The documents described it as a government program designed to create stronger, smarter citizens who could help win the Cold War against Russia. The families had volunteered to be part of scientific experiments. They believed they were being patriotic, helping their country by improving the human race. The government promised them free land, new houses, and a safe place to raise their children. All they had to do was follow certain medical procedures and submit to regular health examinations. I found photographs from the early days of the town. The original families looked normal enough, typical 1,950 seconds Americans with their neat clothes and careful smiles. But there was something in their eyes, a kind of brightness or alertness that seemed unusual. And in the later photos, their children looked different, stronger, more intense, like predators pretending to be pets. The documents mentioned something called the progenitor, but they were vague about what it actually was. They described it as a biological enhancement factor that could improve human genetics through controlled exposure. The government scientists had apparently captured this progenitor and were studying it in underground facilities built beneath the town. According to the records, every woman in the original families was required to spend time near the progenitor during their childbearing years. They called it enhancement therapy. The women would go down into the underground facility and stay close to this creature for several hours at a time. The documents claimed this exposure would make their children stronger, smarter, and more capable. I kept reading through the night, and what I learned made my stomach turn. The progenitor wasn't just some kind of medicine or treatment. It was a living creature that the government had found somewhere and brought to Harmony Hills for study. The scientists didn't really understand what it was or where it came from, but they knew it could change human genetics just by being near pregnant women. The program was abandoned in the 1,960 seconds. The documents said the progenitor had become uncontrollable and hostile. The government pulled out all their scientists and sealed the underground facility. But they left the families behind. They left the creature behind too. For the next few weeks, I watched the town's children more carefully. What I saw made me realize these weren't just unusually gifted kids. They were becoming something else entirely. The teenagers had formed groups that went hunting in the mountains every weekend. Not hunting with guns like normal kids might do, but hunting with their bare hands. I followed one group secretly and watched them chase down a deer. They moved like a pack of wolves, surrounding the animal and taking it down together. Then they ate it raw, right there in the forest, tearing into the meat with their sharp teeth. When I asked their parents about this behavior, they didn't seem concerned at all. "Boys will be boys," said Mr. Johnson, whose son Tyler was the pack leader. "They're just following their instincts. It's healthy for them to embrace their heritage." Heritage. That word kept coming up whenever anyone talked about the special children. Their heritage, their bloodline, their genetic gifts. I started noticing missing person reports in the local newspaper. Hikers and campers were disappearing in the mountains around Harmony Hills. The reports always said the missing people were experienced outdoors enthusiasts who wouldn't have gotten lost or had accidents. Search and rescue teams never found any trace of them. The sheriff, a man named Bill Crawford, didn't seem worried about the disappearances. City folks aren't used to wilderness, he told me when I asked about the missing people. Mountains can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But Sheriff Crawford was obviously one of the enhanced people himself. He was 60 years old but looked 40, moved like a professional athlete, and had the same bright, predatory eyes as all the special children. I realized that the entire police force was made up of the enhanced people. They weren't investigating the disappearances because they already knew what was happening to the missing hikers and campers. The teenage hunting packs had graduated from killing animals to killing humans. One night in June, I was called to treat an injured dog at the Johnson farm. When I arrived, I found Tyler and 3 of his friends in the barn with a deer they'd killed. But it wasn't just any deer. It was a doe that was clearly pregnant. The boys had cut it open and were examining the fetus with the kind of scientific interest that made my skin crawl. "We're studying genetics," Tyler explained when he saw my horrified expression. "Learning about breeding and heredity. Our parents say it's important for us to understand how to improve bloodlines." That's when I realized the truth. These children weren't just enhanced humans, they were being trained as breeders. The town was treating them like livestock, planning their futures, deciding who would mate with whom to create even stronger offspring. I started investigating more carefully, and what I found was beyond horrifying. The underground facility hadn't been abandoned at all. The progenitor was still down there, and it was still alive. The children made regular visits to the creature, receiving what they called blessings that made them stronger and less human with each generation. The newest children, being born in Harmony Hills, barely looked human at all. They had claws instead of fingernails, rows of sharp teeth like sharks, and eyes that glowed in the dark like cats. Their parents proudly showed them off like prize-winning animals. I learned that the town had a breeding schedule. Families carefully planned which children would mate with which other children, tracking bloodlines and genetic traits like dog breeders. They had charts showing which combinations produced the strongest offspring, which traits were dominant, and which genetic lines were most valuable. But they needed fresh genetic material to keep the program going. That's when I discovered what was really happening to the missing hikers and campers. The town was kidnapping outsiders and keeping them prisoner in the underground facility. These captives were forced to breed with the enhanced children who had reached maturity, adding new genes to the town's genetic pool. I found evidence of this when I was called to treat a sick cow at a farm outside town, but when I got there, I realized the animal sounds I'd heard weren't coming from cows. They were coming from human prisoners kept in cages beneath the barn. Men and women who had been captured while hiking or camping, now being used as breeding stock for the town's horrific genetic program. The underground facility had grown into a massive complex over the decades. Using my veterinary skills, I was able to identify what I was seeing. It was exactly like the breeding operations I'd studied in school, except instead of animals, they were breeding humans. There were hundreds of people down there, living in conditions worse than any factory farm. The progenitor itself had grown enormous. It filled most of the underground complex, a creature that looked like a cross between an octopus and a plant, with tentacles that stretched through tunnels connecting every building in town. It was feeding on the failed experiments, the human prisoners who didn't survive the breeding process or whose children weren't enhanced enough to be useful. But the worst part was realizing that the progenitor could control the minds of its hybrid children. The entire town was functioning like a hive, with every enhanced person connected to the creature's will. They weren't individuals anymore. They were parts of a larger organism that was slowly replacing humanity. When I tried to document what I'd found, the children began following me. They moved in coordinated groups, watching my house, tracking my movements, listening to my phone calls. They knew exactly what I was doing because the progenitor could see through their eyes and hear through their ears. I overheard a conversation between several parents about capturing me for the breeding program. They thought my veterinary knowledge would be valuable for improving their genetic experiments. They were planning to add me to their collection of prisoners, to use my education and expertise to help them create even more perfect hybrid offspring. I barely escaped town in the middle of the night, driving without headlights until I was miles away. I contacted the FBI and provided them with everything I'd documented about Harmony Hills. The evidence was overwhelming: photographs, medical records, genetic samples I'd collected, and detailed maps of the underground facility. The government's response was swift and classified. A joint military task force raided Harmony Hills 3 weeks after my escape. What they found was worse than anything I'd reported. The progenitor had grown so large that its tentacles stretched for miles underground, connecting not just the town but several other communities in the region. The creature had been expanding its influence far beyond the original settlement. The military forces that tried to destroy the progenitor were overwhelmed. The hybrid descendants fought with coordinated precision that no human army could match. They moved like parts of a single organism, attacking with inhuman strength and intelligence. The entire operation was declared a failure, and the government established a quarantine zone around the area. I've been relocated under witness protection, but I still receive briefings about the situation. The quarantine zone has been expanded 3 times, as satellite surveillance shows new hybrid communities appearing throughout the region. The enhanced humans are spreading, establishing settlements in remote areas where they can continue their breeding programs without interference. Intelligence reports suggest that hybrid descendants have begun infiltrating normal communities, using their superior abilities to gain positions of power and influence. They're doctors, teachers, police officers, and government officials now. They look human enough to blend in, but they're working to identify and recruit potential breeding partners among the normal population. Recent disappearances in areas surrounding known hybrid communities show that the hunting behavior has escalated. They're not just taking occasional hikers anymore. Entire families are vanishing from rural areas, especially families with young children who might carry useful genetic traits. I continue working with classified research programs, trying to develop ways to identify the hybrids and understand their capabilities. But every test we create, they seem to adapt to. Every detection method we develop, they find ways to defeat. They're evolving faster than we can study them. The psychological profiles of captured hybrids reveal the most terrifying truth of all. They don't see themselves as humans anymore. They view normal people as an inferior species that deserves to be hunted, bred, and ultimately replaced. To them, we're livestock, resources to be managed and consumed. Current intelligence estimates suggest that the hybrid population is approaching critical mass. Government analysts believe that once they reach sufficient numbers, they'll abandon their secrecy and begin open warfare against normal humanity. They have superior strength, intelligence, and coordination. They're connected through telepathic networks that allow perfect communication and strategy. Most terrifying of all, recent genetic analysis shows that their modifications have become self-propagating. Even when hybrids mate with normal humans, their children carry the enhanced traits. The genetic changes created by the progenitor are spreading through natural reproduction, creating a new subspecies that will gradually replace our entire species. I've come to understand that Harmony Hills wasn't just a failed government experiment. It was the beginning of a species war that humanity is already losing. The creatures we created in our underground laboratories have become our successors, and they're methodically eliminating us from our own planet. Every day, I receive reports of more missing families, more unexplained disappearances, more communities where the children seem just a little too strong, a little too smart, a little too perfect. The breeding program never ended. It just moved beyond our ability to control or contain it. And somewhere beneath the earth, in tunnels that stretch for hundreds of miles, the progenitor continues to grow, continues to spread, continues to create new generations of hybrid offspring who will ensure that humanity's time on this planet is finally coming to an end. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I used to believe that my job was to save lives. Now I know that my real job is to warn you about what's coming. Because they're already among us, they're already breeding, and soon there won't be enough of us left to fight back.